She thought it was just another quiet afternoon behind the counter, until a whispered conversation shattered everything. What she heard could destroy lives, and when she repeated every word with chilling accuracy, even the detective couldn't hide his shock. But how did she know so much? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The autumn rain fell steadily over Boston's cobblestone streets, creating a rhythmic percussion against the windows of Brennan's fine goods emporium. Inside the warmly lit establishment, the scent of fresh ground coffee mingled with the sweet aroma of imported tobacco and polished leather. It was 4:30 in the afternoon on a Wednesday in October of 1895, and the shop was experiencing its customary lull between the lunch hour rush and the evening customers who would arrive after their offices closed. Charlotte Waverly stood behind the mahogany counter, her slender fingers arranging a display of fountain pens with practiced precision. At 26 years of age, she possessed a striking beauty that turned heads wherever she went, though she remained largely unaware of the effect she had on others. Her auburn hair was styled in the fashion of the day, swept up elegantly with a few soft curls framing her heart-shaped face. Her green eyes, bright and intelligent, missed little of what transpired around her. She wore a high-collared dress of deep emerald that complemented her coloring, its fitted bodice and leg-of-mutton sleeves speaking to both modesty and current fashion. Charlotte had worked at the Emporium for nearly 3 years, ever since her father's shipping business had failed and the family had been forced to economize. Her mother had been scandalized at first, insisting that no daughter of theirs should work in trade, but Charlotte had been quietly insistent. She enjoyed the independence that her modest salary provided, and she found genuine satisfaction in the interactions with customers and the orderly nature of managing inventory and accounts. The bell above the entrance chimed softly as 2 gentlemen entered, shaking rain from their overcoats. Charlotte glanced up with a welcoming smile, though something in their bearing made her straighten slightly. The first man was portly and well-dressed, his mutton-chop whiskers gray and meticulously groomed. He wore an expensive suit of charcoal wool and carried a silver-handled walking stick. The second man was younger, perhaps in his early 30s, and considerably less refined in appearance. His coat was shabby, his face unshaven, and his eyes darted nervously about the shop. The well-dressed gentleman approached the counter while his companion lingered near the display of cigars, pretending to examine the merchandise but clearly uncomfortable. "Good afternoon, sir," Charlotte greeted warmly. "How may I assist you today?" "I require a particular blend of pipe tobacco," the older man replied, his voice cultured and pleasant. "Something robust, perhaps with a hint of vanilla. What would you recommend?" As Charlotte turned to retrieve several tins from the shelf behind her, explaining the characteristics of each blend, she became aware that the 2 men had moved closer together near the counter. They spoke in hushed tones, clearly assuming she was occupied with her task and paying them no mind. What they could not have known was that Charlotte possessed an extraordinary gift, one she had discovered quite by accident as a child. Her hearing was remarkably acute, far beyond what most people experienced. She could distinguish conversations across crowded rooms, hear the scurrying of mice in the walls, detect the subtlest changes in a person's tone that might betray nervousness or deception. It was both a blessing and a curse, for she heard many things not intended for her ears. She had learned early on to keep this ability to herself, understanding instinctively that others might find it unsettling or even use it against her. Now, as she presented the tobacco selections to the gentleman, her expression remained pleasant and attentive, while her acute hearing captured every word of the whispered exchange happening mere feet away. "You understand what must be done?" the well-dressed man murmured, his cultured voice taking on a cold edge that contrasted sharply with the pleasant tone he had used with Charlotte. "I understand, Mr. Pemberton," the shabby man replied, his voice tight with anxiety. "But I don't know if I can—" "You will do exactly as instructed," Pemberton interrupted, his whisper sharp as a blade. "Friday night, 11 o'clock precisely, the warehouse on Atlantic Avenue, the one with the red door. You will ensure that the ledgers are destroyed completely. Every page, every record of the transactions from the past 6 months. Do you comprehend?" "Yes, but what if someone sees—" "No one will see anything if you follow the plan. The night watchman has been convinced to take his dinner break at precisely that hour. You will have 30 minutes. That should be more than sufficient time to start a small fire in the office. Make it look like an accident, a lamp overturned perhaps. The rest of the building is stone and brick. The damage will be contained to that one room, but everything in it must burn. Charlotte's hands remained steady as she opened a tin of tobacco for the gentleman to smell. Though her heart had begun to race, she kept her expression carefully neutral, her eyes attentive to her customer while her mind worked rapidly to commit every detail of the whispered conversation to memory. "What about Mr. Harrison?" the shabby man asked, his voice barely audible. "He's been asking questions about the discrepancies in the accounts. If the records burn, Mr. Harrison will no longer be a concern after Friday," Pemberton said, and there was something in his tone that sent a chill down Charlotte's spine. "Concentrate on your task. You will be compensated handsomely, as promised. $500 upon completion. That should be more than enough to settle your gambling debts and allow you to start fresh elsewhere. I suggest you take the opportunity to leave Boston for a time. Perhaps New York would suit you." $500, the other man breathed, and Charlotte could hear the mixture of greed and fear in his voice. "Yes, Mr. Pemberton, I'll do it. Friday night, 11 o'clock, Atlantic Avenue warehouse, red door. The ledgers burn. Excellent. Now I suggest you leave separately. Walk to the corner and wait for the streetcar. Do not speak to me again until after the task is complete. You will find your payment in the usual location on Saturday morning." Charlotte turned back to face Pemberton with the tin of tobacco, her smile professional and warm, as if she had heard nothing more concerning than a discussion of the weather. "This particular blend has proven quite popular with our regular patrons, sir. The vanilla note is subtle but distinctive. Would you care to purchase a tin?" "Yes, that will do nicely," Pemberton replied, his voice once again cultured and pleasant, betraying nothing of the dark conversation that had just transpired. "And I shall need a new pipe as well. Something in briarwood, if you have it." As Charlotte wrapped his purchases, the shabby man slipped quietly out of the shop without buying anything. Through the rain-streaked window, she watched him hurry down the street, his collar turned up against the weather, looking for all the world like a man heading toward either salvation or damnation. Pemberton paid for his items with crisp bills, tipped his hat courteously to Charlotte, and departed with the bearing of a perfect gentleman. She watched him go, her mind racing with the implications of what she had overheard. Someone named Harrison was in danger. A warehouse would be burned. Evidence would be destroyed, and she alone knew of the plot. The question that troubled her most deeply as she stood behind the counter, the rain continuing its steady percussion against the windows, was what she should do with this dangerous knowledge. Who would believe her? And even if she could convince someone to listen, would they ask how she had come to overhear such a private conversation? Would they believe in her exceptional hearing, or would they think her a liar, perhaps even an accomplice? The bell chimed again, and Charlotte looked up to see a tall figure entering the shop, shaking water from a dark overcoat. Her breath caught slightly at the sight of him. The man was perhaps 30 years of age, with strong, handsome features and thick dark hair that curled slightly from the dampness. His eyes were a striking gray-blue, intelligent and observant. He stood well over 6 feet tall, his broad shoulders and athletic build evident even beneath his rain-dampened clothing. There was something in his bearing that spoke of authority and purpose, yet his expression as he looked around the shop held a gentleness that immediately put her at ease. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice deep and warm as he approached the counter. "I hope I'm not arriving too close to closing time." "Not at all, sir," Charlotte replied, acutely aware of how her pulse had quickened. "We remain open until 6 o'clock. How may I help you?" The gentleman smiled, and Charlotte felt her cheeks warm slightly. "I find myself in need of a reliable notebook and several good pencils. I'm new to Boston and have been settling into my office. I'm afraid my supplies are woefully inadequate." "Certainly. What sort of work do you do, if I may ask? It helps me recommend the most suitable products." "I'm a detective," he replied, and Charlotte felt her heart skip. "My name is Daniel Thorne. I've recently been appointed to work with the Boston Police Department on certain complicated cases." Charlotte's mind raced. A detective. Here now, just minutes after she had overheard a criminal conspiracy. Was this Providence? She studied his face carefully, noting the honesty in his eyes, the firm set of his jaw that spoke of integrity. Everything about him suggested a man who could be trusted, yet she hesitated. She had kept her secret for so long, had learned to be cautious about revealing what she could do. "That must be fascinating work, Mr. Thorne," she managed, turning to retrieve several notebooks from the shelf. "Dangerous as well, I should imagine." "It can be," he agreed, his eyes following her movements with an attention that made her conscious of every gesture. "But I find it deeply satisfying to bring order to chaos, to solve puzzles that others cannot. There's a particular kind of justice in uncovering the truth, wouldn't you say, Miss Waverly?" she supplied, setting the notebooks on the counter between them. "Charlotte Waverly. And yes, I suppose I would agree, though I confess I've never given it much thought. My world is rather more concerned with inventory and customer service than with mysteries and crime." Daniel Thorne picked up one of the notebooks, examining it with those keen gray-blue eyes. But Charlotte had the distinct impression that his attention was not entirely on the merchandise. "I wouldn't be so certain of that, Miss Waverly. In my experience, ordinary people in ordinary places often witness extraordinary things. They simply don't always recognize the significance of what they've seen or heard." The words hung in the air between them, and Charlotte felt as though he could see directly into her thoughts. She busied herself with displaying the pencils, trying to calm the tumult of emotions and decisions warring within her. "These are excellent quality," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The graphite is smooth and doesn't break easily. Many of our professional clients prefer them." "Then I shall trust your expertise," Daniel said warmly. "I'll take 3 of the notebooks and a dozen of the pencils. And Miss Waverly, if I may say so, you have an extraordinary attention to detail. I noticed how precisely you arranged that display of fountain pens earlier. Such meticulousness is rare and valuable." Charlotte looked up at him, surprised by the compliment and the genuine appreciation in his voice. Their eyes met, and for a moment the bustling world of the shop seemed to fall away. There was something in his gaze that made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced before, as though he recognized something in her that others missed. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," she replied softly. "I believe that details matter, perhaps more than most people realize." "Indeed they do," he agreed, and there was a weight to his words that suggested layers of meaning. Details are often the difference between solving a case and letting a criminal escape justice. A single overlooked detail can mean the difference between safety and danger for innocent people. Charlotte's hands trembled slightly as she wrapped his purchases. The moment had come. She could let him leave, keep her silence, and hope that somehow the plot she had overheard would be discovered by other means. Or she could trust this stranger with the truth and risk everything, her reputation, her secret, perhaps even her safety. She looked at Daniel Thorne's honest face, at the strength and integrity evident in every line of his features, and made her decision. "Mr. Thorne," she said quietly, glancing toward the shop's interior to ensure they were truly alone, "if someone were to overhear something concerning criminal activity, what would be the proper course of action?" His expression sharpened immediately, though he kept his voice casual. "That would depend on the nature of what was overheard. Generally speaking, such information should be reported to the authorities." "Why do you ask, Miss Waverly? Have you heard something troubling?" Charlotte took a deep breath, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he must hear it. "I have. Just moments before you arrived. 2 men were in this very shop, and they believed I was not paying attention to their conversation. But I heard every word, Mr. Thorne. Every single word. And what I heard suggests that a serious crime is being planned." Daniel Thorne's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The casual friendliness remained, but beneath it, Charlotte could sense a sharp, focused intensity that reminded her of a hunting falcon spotting its prey. He leaned slightly closer to the counter, his voice dropping to a confidential tone that somehow made her feel both protected and conspiratorial. "Tell me everything, Miss Waverly," he said quietly. "Every detail you can remember, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem. Start from the beginning." Charlotte glanced once more toward the door, ensuring no new customers had entered. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, creating a curtain of sound that seemed to isolate them in their own private world. She took a steadying breath and began to recount the conversation she had overheard, watching Daniel's expression grow progressively more grave. The first gentleman, the one who purchased the tobacco, was called Mr. Pemberton by his companion. He was well dressed, perhaps 60 years of age, with gray mutton-chop whiskers and a silver-handled walking stick. He spoke like an educated man, someone accustomed to authority and wealth. The other man was younger, poorly dressed, and seemed frightened. Mr. Pemberton gave him very specific instructions. "What were those instructions?" Daniel asked, his gray-blue eyes fixed intently on her face. Charlotte closed her eyes briefly, recalling the exact words with the precision that her extraordinary hearing afforded her. He said, "Friday night, 11 o'clock precisely. The warehouse on Atlantic Avenue, the one with the red door. You will ensure that the ledgers are destroyed completely. Every page, every record of the transactions from the past 6 months. Daniel had produced one of the notebooks he had just purchased and was writing rapidly, his strong hands moving with practiced efficiency. Atlantic Avenue, red door, Friday at 11. What else? Mr. Pemberton said the night watchman had been convinced to take his dinner break at that exact hour, giving them 30 minutes. The other man was instructed to start a fire in the office, to make it look like an accident, perhaps an overturned lamp. He said the building was stone and brick, so the damage would be contained to one room, but everything in it must burn. Arson, Daniel murmured, his jaw tightening. Destruction of evidence. What about this man Harrison they mentioned? Charlotte felt a chill run through her at the memory of Pemberton's tone when he had spoken that name. The shabby man asked about Mr. Harrison, said he had been asking questions about discrepancies in the accounts. Mr. Pemberton said that Harrison would no longer be a concern after Friday. The way he said it, Mr. Thorne, it frightened me. It sounded like a threat, not just to Harrison's employment, but to his very life. Daniel's expression had grown dark, his hand gripping the pencil with barely controlled tension. Did they mention anything else? Any other names, locations, or details about their business? Mr. Pemberton promised to pay the other man $500 upon completion of the task, and suggested he leave Boston for New York afterwards. He told him the payment would be in the usual location on Saturday morning, and Mr. Pemberton said they should not speak again until after the task was complete. Miss Waverly, Daniel said slowly, setting down his pencil and looking at her with an expression that combined admiration and concern. You have just recounted that conversation with remarkable precision. Most people struggle to remember even the general substance of something they've overheard casually. You've given me nearly word-for-word accuracy, including specific details about timing, location, and amounts. How is that possible? This was the moment Charlotte had dreaded, yet something about Daniel Thorne's straightforward honesty made her want to trust him with the truth. She met his gaze steadily, drawing strength from the kindness she saw there beneath the detective's professional intensity. I have unusually acute hearing, Mr. Thorne, she said quietly. I have had it since I was a child. I can distinguish conversations across crowded rooms, hear things that others cannot. It is not something I speak of often, you understand. People tend to be uncomfortable when they learn of it, worried about what I might have heard them say. But it means that when I do hear something, I remember it exactly. Every word, every inflection, every nuance of tone. Daniel studied her for a long moment, and Charlotte braced herself for disbelief or suspicion. Instead, his expression softened with something that looked remarkably like wonder. What an extraordinary gift, he said gently, and what a burden it must be at times, to hear so much when others believe their words are private. Thank you for trusting me with this, Miss Waverly. I give you my word as a gentleman and as an officer of the law that your confidence will be respected. Relief flooded through Charlotte, so intense it made her slightly dizzy. Then you believe me? About the conversation? About what I heard? I do, Daniel replied firmly. Your account is too detailed, too specific to be fabricated. Moreover, your obvious distress at what you overheard speaks to its authenticity. But Miss Waverly, I must be frank with you. This information places you in a potentially dangerous position. If these men were to learn that you heard their plans and reported them to the authorities, you could become a target. Charlotte had not fully considered this possibility, and the thought sent a tremor of fear through her. What should I do? For the moment, continue with your normal routine. Do not speak of this to anyone else. If either of those men returns to the shop, treat them exactly as you would any other customer. Give no indication that you heard anything unusual. Can you do that? Yes, Charlotte said, though her voice wavered slightly. Yes, I believe I can. Daniel reached across the counter and, with a gentleness that made her heart flutter, briefly touched her hand. It was the merest brush of his fingers against hers, entirely proper and yet somehow profoundly comforting. You're very brave, Miss Waverly. Not many people would have come forward with this information, especially given the personal risk involved. I want you to know that I will do everything in my power to ensure your safety while we investigate this matter. The warmth of his touch lingered even after he withdrew his hand. Charlotte found herself looking into those gray-blue eyes and seeing not just a detective, but a man of deep integrity and surprising compassion. There was something else there too, something that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear or danger. "What will you do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to identify these men and discover exactly what they're involved in," Daniel replied. "Your description of the well-dressed gentleman, this Pemberton, is quite detailed. Silver-handled walking stick, gray mutton chop whiskers, expensive clothing. Such a distinctive appearance should make him relatively easy to trace among Boston's merchant class. The mention of ledgers and account discrepancies suggests some form of financial fraud or embezzlement, and the name Harrison may help narrow the field considerably. Do you think you can find him in time?"
"It's Wednesday afternoon now, and they plan to act on Friday night. That's less than 3 days. I will find him," Daniel said with quiet certainty. "But I need to ask you something, Miss Waverly, and I want you to consider it carefully before answering. Would you be willing to work with me on this investigation? Your remarkable memory and attention to detail could prove invaluable. However, I must emphasize that there would be some risk involved." Charlotte's first instinct was to refuse, to retreat to the safety of her ordinary life behind the counter of the emporium. But as she looked at Daniel Thorne's earnest face, she found herself drawn by something stronger than fear. Here was a chance to do something that truly mattered, to prevent a crime and perhaps save a man's life. Moreover, she could not deny the excitement that stirred within her at the prospect of spending more time in this remarkable man's company. "What would you need me to do?" she asked. A smile touched Daniel's lips, transforming his serious features with warmth. "Tomorrow evening, I would like you to accompany me to several establishments frequented by Boston's business community. We will be seeking information about anyone matching Pemberton's description, and your ability to hear conversations that I might miss could prove crucial. I will, of course, ensure that we maintain complete propriety. My landlady, Mrs. Henderson, is a most respectable widow who would be happy to serve as a chaperone, if that would make you more comfortable." Charlotte considered for a moment, weighing propriety against opportunity. "I think a chaperone would indeed be wise, Mr. Thorne. My mother is quite particular about such matters, and I should not wish to damage my reputation. But yes, I am willing to help you. When and where should I meet you?" "There's a tea room on Beacon Street, the Rose and Crown. Do you know it?" "I do. It's quite respectable." "Excellent. Would 7 o'clock tomorrow evening be suitable? We can take tea first, and then visit a few other locations. I'll have Mrs. Henderson meet us there." 7 o'clock, Charlotte agreed, feeling a thrill of anticipation mixed with nervousness. "I shall tell my parents that I'm meeting a friend for tea. It isn't entirely untrue." Daniel's expression grew serious again. "Miss Waverly, before we proceed, I must ask you once more if you're certain about this. These men are planning arson and possibly worse. They will not hesitate to harm anyone who threatens their plans. I can conduct this investigation without your assistance, though it may take longer and be less thorough. I will not think less of you if you choose to withdraw now." Charlotte straightened her shoulders, surprised by the resolve she felt. "I am certain, Mr. Thorne. What I overheard suggests that an innocent man may be in danger. If my abilities can help prevent harm from coming to him, then I have a responsibility to act. Besides," she added with a slight smile, "I confess that the prospect of a real investigation is rather more exciting than arranging displays of fountain pens." Daniel laughed, a rich, warm sound that made Charlotte's heart skip. "I suspect you have hidden depths, Miss Waverly. Very well. Then we are partners in this endeavor. I should warn you, however, that detective work often involves long hours of tedium, punctuated by brief moments of excitement or danger. It is not always as glamorous as the penny dreadfuls would have one believe." "I think I can manage tedium," Charlotte replied with a touch of humor. "I have, after all, survived 3 years of retail." Their shared laughter created a moment of connection that felt both natural and profound. When the bell above the door chimed, announcing a new customer, Charlotte was surprised to realize how much time had passed. The rain had lessened to a gentle drizzle, and the gray afternoon light was beginning to fade toward evening. Daniel collected his purchases, tucking the notebook with his notes carefully into his coat pocket. "Until tomorrow evening, then, Miss Waverly. 7 o'clock at the Rose and Crown. I shall be there, Mr. Thorne." He tipped his hat to her, and as he turned to leave, Charlotte called out softly, "Mr. Thorne?" He paused, looking back at her with an expression of gentle inquiry. "Thank you," she said simply, "for believing me, for trusting me with this." "No, Miss Waverly," he replied,
his gray-blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "Thank you for your courage and for your willingness to stand up for what is right. It is a rare and precious quality." Then he was gone, striding out into the drizzling rain with the confident gait of a man with purpose. Charlotte watched him disappear into the gray evening, her hand unconsciously touching the spot where his fingers had briefly rested against hers. The remaining hours of her shift passed in a blur of ordinary transactions and mechanical pleasantries with customers. Her mind was wholly occupied with thoughts of Daniel Thorne and the investigation that lay ahead. She replayed their conversation endlessly, analyzing every word, every glance, every subtle shift in his expression. There had been something in the way he looked at her, something beyond professional appreciation for a helpful witness. Or was she simply imagining it, allowing her imagination to run wild like a foolish girl reading too much into common courtesy? At 6 o'clock, she closed the shop and made her way through the damp streets toward her family's modest home in the South End. The rain had stopped entirely now, leaving the cobblestones slick and gleaming in the light of the gas lamps that were being lit by the lamplighter making his rounds. The air smelled clean and fresh, washed free of the usual city odors of smoke and horses. Her mother was in the parlor when Charlotte arrived, working on her embroidery by the light of the oil lamp. Margaret Waverley was a handsome woman in her early 50s, with silver threads beginning to show in her dark hair. She had been a beauty in her youth, and Charlotte had inherited her delicate features and graceful bearing. "There you are, dear," her mother said, looking up with a smile. "I was beginning to worry. The rain was so heavy this afternoon." "I'm sorry, Mother. We had a few late customers." Charlotte removed her damp cloak and hung it carefully on the hall stand. "Is father home?" "Not yet. He had a meeting with his solicitor about those debts from the business. I do hope it goes well." A shadow crossed Margaret's face, the ever-present worry about their reduced circumstances showing through. "Did you have a good day at the shop?" "Quite eventful, actually," Charlotte said carefully, settling into the chair opposite her mother. "Mother, I've been invited to take tea tomorrow evening at the Rose and Crown with a new acquaintance. I know it's somewhat sudden, but I would very much like to go. There will be a chaperone present, of course." Margaret set down her embroidery, her expression brightening with interest. "A new acquaintance? Tell me, is this a young lady or—" Her eyes sparkled hopefully. "Perhaps a gentleman?" Charlotte felt her cheeks warm. "It is a gentleman, Mother, but please don't make too much of it. He is a customer at the shop, and we simply found we had some common interest to discuss. His landlady will be joining us to ensure complete propriety." "A gentleman customer who wishes to take tea with you in a respectable establishment with a chaperone present," Margaret repeated, clearly delighted. "That sounds perfectly proper to me, dear. What is his name? What does he do? Is he from a good family?" "His name is Mr. Daniel Thorne, and he is a detective with the Boston Police Department. I don't know much about his family, as we've only just met today." Charlotte chose her words carefully, staying as close to the truth as possible while omitting the more alarming details. "He seemed very intelligent and courteous. I thought it would be pleasant to accept his invitation." Margaret's expression had shifted from delight to slight concern at the mention of his profession. "A police detective? That's rather unusual, isn't it? Still, if he's respectable and there will be a proper chaperone, I see no harm in it." "You'll wear your blue dress with the lace collar, I think. It's very becoming on you." "Yes, Mother," Charlotte agreed, relieved that the interrogation had been relatively painless. She spent the rest of the evening helping her mother with dinner preparations and trying not to think too obviously about the following evening, though her mind kept wandering to gray-blue eyes and strong, gentle hands. The following evening arrived with agonizing slowness for Charlotte. She spent the day at the Emporium in a state of nervous anticipation, jumping slightly each time the bell above the door chimed, half expecting to see either Pemberton returning or Daniel arriving early. Neither appeared, and the day proceeded with its usual rhythm of customers seeking tobacco, writing implements, fine leather goods, and other gentlemen's accessories. At 5:30, Charlotte's employer, Mr. Brennan, approached the counter with a kindly smile. He was a rotund man in his 60s with a perpetually cheerful disposition and an appreciation for Charlotte's diligent work. "Miss Waverley, you've been distracted all day," he observed with gentle amusement, "and you keep glancing at the clock. Might I suggest you leave a bit early this evening? Young Mary can manage the last half hour before closing. You clearly have somewhere important to be." Charlotte felt her cheeks color. "Is it that obvious, Mr. Brennan?" "My dear, I've been married for 40 years. I know the look of a young woman preparing for an important engagement. Go on now. Enjoy your evening." Grateful for his understanding, Charlotte hurried home to change into the blue dress her mother had selected. It was indeed becoming, with its fitted bodice, high lace collar, and flowing skirt that rustled softly as she moved. She arranged her auburn hair with extra care, allowing a few curls to frame her face while pinning the rest up in an elegant coiffure. Her mother fussed over her appearance, adjusting the small cameo brooch at her throat and making sure her gloves were spotless. "You look lovely, dear," Margaret said, stepping back to admire her daughter. "This Mr. Thorne is a fortunate man to have your company this evening." "Mother, please," Charlotte protested, though she couldn't quite suppress her smile. "It's merely tea and conversation." "Of course it is," her mother agreed with a knowing look that suggested she believed otherwise. Charlotte arrived at the Rose and Crown at precisely 7 o'clock. The tea room was elegantly appointed, with lace curtains, polished wooden tables, and the gentle glow of gas lamps, creating an atmosphere of refined comfort. The scent of fresh-baked scones and brewing tea filled the air, mingling with the subtle perfume of the roses that adorned each table. Daniel Thorne was already there, standing near the entrance and watching for her arrival. Charlotte's breath caught at the sight of him. He wore a well-tailored suit of dark blue wool that emphasized his tall, athletic frame, and his thick, dark hair had been carefully brushed back from his handsome face. When he saw her, his expression lit with genuine pleasure that made her heart flutter. "Miss Waverley," he said, stepping forward to greet her. "You look absolutely lovely this evening." "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," Charlotte replied, acutely aware of the warmth in his gray-blue eyes as they met hers. "I hope I haven't kept you waiting." "Not at all. You're precisely on time, which is a virtue I greatly admire. May I introduce you to my landlady, Mrs. Henderson?" He gestured toward an elderly woman seated at a nearby table. She was perhaps 70 years of age, with snow-white hair, kind brown eyes, and a pleasant, grandmotherly demeanor that immediately put Charlotte at ease. "How do you do, my dear?" Mrs. Henderson said warmly. "Mr. Thorne has told me what a help you've been to him. It's delightful to meet you." They settled at a corner table that offered a degree of privacy while remaining entirely proper. Daniel ordered tea and an assortment of pastries, and for a few minutes they engaged in pleasant small talk about the weather, the charm of the tea room, and other innocuous subjects. Charlotte was conscious of Mrs. Henderson's presence providing the necessary propriety, though the elderly woman had the discretion to focus her attention on her own tea, allowing the younger pair to converse with reasonable privacy. Once the server had departed with their order, Daniel leaned slightly forward, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. "I've made considerable progress since yesterday, Miss Waverley. Your description of Pemberton proved invaluable." "You've identified him?" Charlotte asked, matching his quiet tone. "I believe so. There are only a handful of men in Boston's business community who match the description you provided so precisely. Through some discreet inquiries at the Commercial Exchange and various gentlemen's clubs, I've narrowed it to one likely candidate, Cornelius Pemberton, president of the Pemberton Shipping and Mercantile Company." Charlotte's eyes widened. "Pemberton Shipping? But that's one of the largest trading companies in Boston. They handle imports from all over the world." "Indeed they do," Daniel confirmed, "which makes the mention of ledgers and financial discrepancies particularly interesting. I did some research into the company's recent activities. 6 months ago, there were rumors of accounting irregularities, though nothing was ever proven. A junior accountant named Robert Harrison began asking uncomfortable questions about certain shipments that appeared in the books but never actually arrived at the warehouses." "The Harrison they mentioned," Charlotte breathed. "He's an accountant investigating the discrepancies." "Precisely. And if those ledgers are destroyed, any evidence of fraud or embezzlement goes up in smoke, literally." Daniel's expression grew grim. "But there's more, Miss Waverley. I made inquiries about Harrison's current situation. He's apparently taken ill quite suddenly. His physician believes it may be some form of poisoning, though the symptoms are subtle enough that it could be dismissed as a natural illness." Charlotte felt a chill run through her. They're already moving against him. Mr. Pemberton said Harrison would no longer be a concern after Friday. Perhaps they meant because he would be too ill to interfere, or worse. "That's my fear as well," Daniel agreed. "I've assigned a trusted colleague to watch Harrison's residence and ensure no further attempts are made on his life. But we need solid evidence against Pemberton, and we need it before Friday night." Their tea arrived, providing a brief interruption. Mrs. Henderson engaged Charlotte in pleasant conversation about her work at the Emporium, giving Daniel a moment to collect his thoughts. Once the server had departed again, Daniel continued in his quiet, confidential tone. "Miss Waverley, I have a plan, but it will require your assistance and your remarkable hearing. This evening, after we finish our tea, I'd like to visit 2 establishments where Pemberton is known to conduct business. The first is the Merchants Club on Tremont Street, a private gentleman's club where many shipping magnates gather. The second is a rather less savory establishment near the docks, a tavern called the Anchor, where I believe Pemberton may conduct his more questionable transactions. You want me to listen for information about his activities?" Charlotte said, understanding immediately. "Yes. Your ability to distinguish conversations across a crowded room could allow us to gather intelligence that would otherwise be impossible to obtain. However, I must be frank about the risks. If Pemberton or his associates were to recognize you from the Emporium, or if they were to suspect that someone was listening to their private conversations, the danger would be considerable." Charlotte considered this carefully, weighing fear against duty and the undeniable excitement that thrummed through her veins. She looked at Daniel's honest, concerned face and felt a surge of determination. "I'm willing to take that risk, Mr. Thorne, but how will we manage it? Surely a gentleman's club would not admit a woman, and a tavern near the docks seems hardly the place for a respectable lady." A smile tugged at Daniel's lips. "You're quite right on both counts. However, the Merchants Club has a ladies' parlor adjacent to the main dining room, separated only by a decorative screen and some potted palms. Ladies often wait there while their husbands or fathers conduct business. As for the Anchor, we won't actually enter the establishment. There's a warehouse directly across the street with a window that overlooks the tavern's main room. I happen to know the warehouse owner, who has given me permission to use it for surveillance purposes." "You've thought of everything," Charlotte said, admiration evident in her voice. "I try to be thorough," Daniel replied, and there was something in his expression, a warmth and gentleness, that made Charlotte's pulse quicken. "But Miss Waverley, I want you to understand that at any point this evening, if you feel uncomfortable or wish to withdraw, you need only say so. Your safety is my paramount concern. I understand, Mr. Thorne, and I appreciate your consideration, but I meant what I said yesterday. I want to help." They finished their tea in companionable conversation, with Mrs. Henderson occasionally joining in to share amusing anecdotes about Daniel's habits as a lodger. Charlotte learned that he often worked late into the night, that he had a fondness for strong coffee and Mrs. Henderson's apple pie, and that he was unfailingly courteous and considerate despite the often grim nature of his work. "He's a good man, my dear," Mrs. Henderson confided to Charlotte as they prepared to depart. "I've had many lodgers over the years, but few with Mr. Thorne's integrity and kindness. You'll be quite safe in his company, I assure you." The Merchants Club proved to be exactly as Daniel had described, an imposing brick building with gleaming windows and an air of exclusivity. Daniel escorted Charlotte to the ladies' parlor, a elegantly furnished room with velvet settees, gilt-framed mirrors, and the promised decorative screen that separated it from the main dining room beyond. "I'll be in the dining room," Daniel murmured to Charlotte, as she settled onto a settee near the screen. "If you hear anything of interest, simply glance toward the doorway, and I'll find an excuse to step out and speak with you." Charlotte nodded, her heart beginning to race with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Through the decorative screen, she could see the shadowy forms of gentlemen dining and conversing, though their features were obscured. But her extraordinary hearing brought their voices to her with perfect clarity, as though she were standing among them rather than separated by screen and distance. For nearly an hour she listened to mundane conversations about shipping schedules, commodity prices, and various business transactions. Then, just as she was beginning to wonder if the evening would prove fruitless, she heard a voice that sent recognition jolting through her. It was Pemberton, his cultured tones unmistakable even in casual conversation. "The matter we discussed will be resolved by Saturday," Pemberton was saying to someone Charlotte could not see. "The inconvenient records will be dealt with, and any remaining obstacles removed. I assure you, the irregularities in our books will never come to light." "And the accountant?" another voice asked, this one rougher and less refined. "Harrison is already suffering the consequences of his meddling. By the time anyone thinks to examine the accounts, he'll be in no condition to corroborate his concerns, and without the physical ledgers to support his claims, any accusations will be dismissed as the ravings of a sick man. You're certain your man will follow through with the warehouse fire? Absolutely. He's desperate enough and greedy enough to do exactly as instructed. The beauty of it is that even if he were caught and tried to implicate me, it would be his word against mine. Who would believe a known gambler and debtor over the president of Pemberton Shipping? Charlotte felt her hands trembling as she absorbed every word. This was the evidence Daniel needed, confirmation directly from Pemberton's own mouth that he was orchestrating both the poisoning of Harrison and the planned arson. She glanced toward the doorway as Daniel had instructed, catching his eye immediately. He excused himself from his own table and met her in the corridor outside the ladies' parlor. "You've heard something," he said immediately, reading her expression. "Everything," Charlotte whispered urgently. "Pemberton is here, and he just confirmed the entire plot to another man. The fire, Harrison's poisoning, all of it. Mr. Thorne, he said Harrison is already suffering from the poisoning, that he'll be in no condition to corroborate his concerns even if he survives." Daniel's jaw tightened with controlled fury. "Did you hear anything that might help us identify the other man he was speaking with? Or any new details about the planned arson?" The other man had a rough voice, less educated than Pemberton. I didn't recognize it, but Pemberton seemed confident that his hired man would follow through, mentioned that he was desperate and greedy. He also said that even if the man were caught, it would be his word against Pemberton's, and no one would believe a gambler and debtor. "Excellent work, Miss Waverly," Daniel said, his hand briefly touching her arm in a gesture of appreciation and concern. "I think we have what we need from here. Let's move on to the anchor. If we're fortunate, we might catch a glimpse of the man Pemberton hired to carry out the arson." They took a hansom cab through the darkening streets toward the waterfront. Mrs. Henderson had retired to her own home after tea, satisfied that Daniel would see Charlotte safely home afterwards. The neighborhoods grew progressively rougher as they approached the docks, the elegant brownstones giving way to warehouses, sailors' boarding houses, and establishments of questionable repute. The warehouse Daniel had mentioned was a sturdy brick building that smelled of stored grain and hemp rope. He produced a key and let them in through a side entrance, then led Charlotte up a narrow wooden staircase to the second floor. A dusty window overlooked the street, and directly opposite, the tavern called The Anchor. The window was grimy with salt air and neglect, but it provided a clear view into the Anchor's main room. Gas lamps illuminated rough wooden tables crowded with sailors, dock workers, and men of dubious occupation. The atmosphere was thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of cheap whiskey that seemed to seep through the very walls of the warehouse where Charlotte and Daniel stood watching. Daniel had brought a small telescope, which he used to observe the tavern's patrons. Charlotte stood beside him, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence, and focused her extraordinary hearing on the conversations drifting across the street. The cacophony of voices was initially overwhelming, dozens of overlapping conversations about ships, cargo, gambling debts, and crude humor. But Charlotte had learned long ago how to filter through the noise, focusing on one voice at a time like tuning a violin string. "There," Daniel murmured, adjusting the telescope. "The man in the corner, the one hunched over his drink. That's James Mallory, a warehouse clerk for Pemberton Shipping, who's known to have substantial gambling debts. He matches the general description you gave of the shabby man from the Emporium." Charlotte directed her attention toward that corner of the tavern, and immediately she caught Mallory's voice, nervous and slurred with alcohol. He was speaking to a companion, his words tumbling out in an anxious rush. "I don't know if I can go through with it, Tom," Mallory was saying. "Burning down a building, even just one room, that's arson. They hang men for arson. And what if someone gets hurt? What if the watchman comes back early?" "You're getting $500, his companion replied roughly. "That's more money than you'd see in 2 years of honest work. Enough to pay off everything you owe and start fresh. You said you wanted out of Boston anyway, wanted to try your luck in New York. Well, here's your chance. But what about Harrison? I heard he's sick, real sick. Some are saying he might not make it. If he dies and they find out about the fire, they'll know it was connected. They'll investigate. Harrison's illness ain't your concern. You do your job Friday night, collect your money Saturday, and be on a train to New York by Sunday morning. Let Pemberton worry about the rest." Charlotte's heart was pounding as she absorbed every word. She glanced at Daniel, whose expression was grim and focused as he watched through the telescope. "He's wavering," Charlotte whispered. "Mallory is having second thoughts about the arson. His companion is trying to convince him to go through with it, reminding him about the money and his debts. Good, Daniel replied quietly. A man with doubts is a man who might be persuaded to turn evidence against his employer. The question is whether we can reach him before Friday night, and whether we can offer him something better than Pemberton's $500 and a ticket to New York. They continued their surveillance for another hour as the tavern grew more crowded and raucous. Charlotte heard fragments of other conversations, some involving Pemberton Shipping's business, others merely the rough talk of working men seeking escape from their hard lives. But nothing else of immediate relevance emerged. Finally, as the church bells struck 10 o'clock, Daniel touched Charlotte's arm gently. "We should get you home, Miss Waverly. Your parents will be concerned if you're out too late, and we have what we need for now." They descended the warehouse stairs and emerged onto the street, where Daniel hailed another hansom cab. As they settled into the leather seats, Charlotte felt the weight of the evening's discoveries pressing upon her. They had confirmed Pemberton's guilt and identified his hired accomplice, but time was running short and a man's life hung in the balance. "What will you do now?" Charlotte asked as the cab rattled over the cobblestones toward her home. Daniel was silent for a moment, his handsome features illuminated intermittently by the passing street lamps. "First thing tomorrow morning, I'll approach Mallory before he goes to work. I'll offer him immunity from prosecution in exchange for his testimony against Pemberton. I'll also offer him protection and enough money to truly start fresh somewhere safe. It's a better deal than Pemberton is offering him, and without the burden of guilt and fear that would follow him for the rest of his life. Do you think he'll accept?" "I believe so. You heard his doubts, his moral struggle. He's not a hardened criminal, just a desperate man who made a poor choice. Given a better option, I think he'll take it. And Harrison, is there anything we can do to help him?" "I've already sent word to a physician I trust, Dr. Whitmore, who specializes in toxicology. He's examining Harrison tonight and will administer treatments to counteract whatever poison Pemberton has been using. With proper care and the cessation of further poisoning, Harrison should make a full recovery." Relief flooded through Charlotte. "Then we may actually save him. Thanks to you, Miss Waverly," Daniel said, turning to look at her directly. The street lamp light caught his gray-blue eyes, making them seem to glow with an intensity that took her breath away. "Without your courage in coming forward, without your remarkable ability to hear and remember what others cannot, Harrison would likely have died, and Pemberton would have destroyed all evidence of his crimes. You've prevented a murder and brought a criminal to justice." Charlotte felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze. "We've brought him to justice together, Mr. Thorne. I merely provided information. You're the one who knew what to do with it, who conducted the investigation and put all the pieces together. We make a good team," Daniel said softly, and there was something in his voice that suggested he meant more than just their detective work. The cab pulled up before Charlotte's modest home, and Daniel stepped down to help her descend. His hand was warm and strong as it held hers, and neither of them seemed in any hurry to break the contact. They stood on the sidewalk in the pool of light from the street lamp, the autumn night cool and still around them. "Miss Waverly, Charlotte," Daniel began, then paused as if choosing his words carefully. "These past 2 days working with you on this investigation have been the most remarkable of my professional life. But more than that, I find myself hoping that once this case is concluded, you might permit me to continue our acquaintance. Not as detective and witness, but as—" He hesitated, then continued with quiet determination, "as a gentleman caller, if you would be willing to receive me in that capacity." Charlotte's heart soared even as she struggled to maintain her composure. "I would be very willing indeed, Mr. Thorne. In fact, I find myself hoping for precisely the same thing." Daniel's smile transformed his features, making him look younger and somehow more vulnerable. "Then may I call on you this Sunday afternoon?" "Properly, at your home, to meet your parents and perhaps take a walk if the weather permits." "I would like that very much," Charlotte replied, her own smile matching his. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her gloved fingers that somehow felt far more intimate than the brief touch should have been. "Until Sunday, then. Sleep well, Charlotte, and thank you for everything." Charlotte floated through her front door, barely conscious of her mother's eager questions about her evening. She provided the barest details, pleading exhaustion, and retreated to her room where she could savor the memory of Daniel's words, his smile, the promise of Sunday's visit. The next morning arrived bright and clear, the autumn sun burning away the last traces of the previous day's rain. Charlotte went to work at the emporium in a state of distracted happiness, her mind dwelling more on Daniel than on the customers she served. It wasn't until nearly noon that a messenger boy arrived with a note addressed to her. Charlotte's hands trembled slightly as she opened it, recognizing Daniel's strong, clear handwriting. "My dear Miss Waverly," the note read, "I am pleased to report complete success in this morning's endeavors. Mallory accepted my offer with evident relief and has provided a full written confession of Pemberton's plot, including details of the planned arson and confirmation that Pemberton has been slowly poisoning Harrison with arsenic mixed into Harrison's daily coffee at the office. Armed with this testimony, I obtained a warrant for Pemberton's arrest. He is now in custody and will face charges of attempted murder, conspiracy to commit arson, and embezzlement. Harrison is recovering well under Dr. Whitmore's care and is expected to make a full recovery. The ledgers have been secured as evidence, and a full audit of Pemberton Shipping's accounts is underway. Justice has been served, thanks in no small part to your courage and your remarkable gift. I remain most sincerely yours, Daniel Thorne." Charlotte read the note 3 times, relief and joy washing over her in equal measure. Harrison would live. Pemberton would face justice. The plot had been foiled, and she had been part of making it happen. But more than the satisfaction of a successful investigation, more than the knowledge that she had helped prevent a terrible crime, what filled her heart was the way Daniel had signed the note. "Most sincerely yours." Those 3 simple words held a world of promise. The days between Friday and Sunday passed with agonizing slowness. Charlotte learned through newspaper accounts that Cornelius Pemberton had been formally charged with multiple crimes and that the evidence against him was overwhelming. His shipping company was in disarray, with several other executives implicated in the embezzlement scheme. Robert Harrison, the brave accountant who had first discovered the irregularities, was hailed as a hero and had been offered a position with the city's Financial Oversight Committee. On Sunday afternoon, Daniel Thorne arrived at the Waverly home precisely at 2 o'clock, dressed in his finest suit and carrying a bouquet of autumn flowers for Charlotte's mother. Margaret Waverly was charmed immediately, and even Charlotte's father, usually suspicious of any man showing interest in his daughter, found himself warming to the tall, honest detective who spoke so respectfully and showed such obvious regard for Charlotte. After a proper visit in the parlor, during which Daniel fielded questions about his work, his family, and his prospects with grace and good humor, Charlotte's parents gave permission for the couple to take a chaperoned walk through the nearby park. Charlotte's younger sister, Emma, thrilled at being given such an important responsibility, trailed behind them at a discreet distance. The park was beautiful in its autumn glory, the trees ablaze with gold and crimson leaves that drifted gently to the ground with each breath of wind. Daniel offered Charlotte his arm, and they walked slowly along the gravel paths, talking easily about everything and nothing. "I've been thinking," Daniel said as they paused beside a small pond where ducks glided serenely across the water, "about how remarkable it is that you happened to be working at the emporium that particular afternoon, that Pemberton happened to come in at that precise moment, that I happened to arrive just minutes after you overheard his plot. It seems almost like fate, doesn't it?" "Perhaps it was," Charlotte replied, looking up at his handsome face. "Or perhaps it was simply that we were both in the right place at the right time, doing what we were meant to do." "I prefer to think it was fate," Daniel said softly, "because it brought you into my life, Charlotte, and I find that I cannot imagine my life without you in it now." Charlotte felt her breath catch. It was too soon for such declarations, by all the rules of propriety and courtship. They had known each other less than a week. And yet, she felt the truth of his words echoing in her own heart. In those few intense days, they had shared danger and discovery, had trusted each other with secrets and fears, had worked together toward a common goal. They had learned each other's character in ways that months of ordinary courtship might never have revealed. "I feel the same way," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's frightening, how quickly and how deeply my feelings have developed. But they're real, Daniel. As real as anything I've ever known." He took both her hands in his, mindful of Emma's watchful presence but unable to resist the contact. "Then may I court you properly, Charlotte? May I call on you regularly, take you to concerts and lectures, introduce you to my friends and colleagues? May I, in time, speak to your father about my intentions?" "Yes," Charlotte said, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "Yes, to all of it." They stood there by the pond, hands clasped, looking into each other's eyes and seeing a future full of promise. Behind them, Emma sighed dramatically, thinking this was the most romantic thing she had ever witnessed, and already planning how she would describe it to her friends. Over the following months, Daniel did indeed court Charlotte properly. He called on her every Sunday without fail, and often on Wednesday evenings as well. They attended concerts at Symphony Hall, lectures at the Athenaeum, and took long walks through the city's parks and gardens. Charlotte met Daniel's colleagues at the police department, who uniformly approved of the intelligent, perceptive young woman who had helped crack the Pemberton case. Daniel, in turn, was welcomed into the Waverly family circle, where his kindness, integrity, and obvious devotion to Charlotte won over even the most skeptical relatives. Charlotte continued to work at the Emporium, but now her days had a new dimension. Daniel would occasionally stop by during his investigations to ask her opinion on some aspect of a case, or simply to see her smile. Her extraordinary hearing, once a secret burden she carried alone, became a gift she could share with the man she loved, using it to help solve crimes and bring justice to those who deserved it. Robert Harrison recovered fully from his poisoning and became a frequent dinner guest at the Waverly home, grateful beyond words to the young woman whose courage had saved his life. He and Charlotte developed a warm friendship, and he often joked that he owed her not just his life, but his newfound career success as well. As winter gave way to spring, Daniel asked Charlotte's father for permission to marry her. The answer was an enthusiastic yes, and on a beautiful May afternoon in 1896, Charlotte Waverly became Charlotte Thorne in a ceremony attended by friends, family, and half the Boston Police Department. They set up house in a charming brownstone in the back bay, where Daniel's study overlooked a small garden that Charlotte tended with loving care. The house became known among Daniel's colleagues as the place to bring difficult cases, for Mrs. Thorne had a remarkable ability to hear connections and details that others missed, and her insights had proven invaluable time and again. But for Charlotte and Daniel, their greatest joy was not in the cases they solved or the criminals they brought to justice. It was in the life they built together, a partnership of equals founded on trust, respect, and a love that had begun with a whispered threat overheard at a counter and had grown into something beautiful, enduring, and true. On quiet evenings, they would sit together in the parlor, Daniel reading case files while Charlotte worked on her embroidery or read a novel. Sometimes she would pause and tilt her head, listening to something only she could hear, and Daniel would look up with that familiar expression of admiration and love. "What is it?" he would ask. "What do you hear?" And Charlotte would smile, that same bright, intelligent smile that had captured his heart in the Emporium so many months before. Sometimes she heard clues to mysteries, whispers of crimes that needed solving. But other times, especially on those peaceful evenings, she heard only the sounds of their happy home, the ticking of the clock, the crackle of the fire, the beating of two hearts that had found their perfect match. "Nothing of importance," she would reply, reaching for his hand. "Just the sound of home." And Daniel would squeeze her hand gently, understanding that she had found something more precious than any mystery to solve. She had found love, partnership, and a place where her extraordinary gift was not a burden to hide, but a blessing to share. The case that had brought them together, the dangerous plot they had unraveled, became a story they would tell their children and grandchildren in years to come. But the true story, the one that mattered most, was not about crimes and criminals. It was about two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and had built a life together filled with purpose, passion, and profound happiness. As Charlotte settled into Daniel's arms that evening, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, she reflected on how a single moment of courage, a decision to speak up about what she had overheard, had changed the entire course of her life. She had saved a man from death, brought a criminal to justice, and found the great love of her life, all because she had trusted her instincts and trusted Daniel Thorne. And Daniel, holding his remarkable wife close, felt grateful every day for the providence that had sent him into Brennan's fine goods emporium on that rainy October afternoon. He had gone in seeking notebooks and pencils, and had found instead the missing piece of his own heart, a partner who understood him completely and who shared his passion for justice and truth. Together, they had solved the mystery of the whispered threat. But more importantly, they had discovered the greatest mystery of all, that two souls, when perfectly matched, can create something far more beautiful than either could have imagined alone. They had found their happily ever after, not in spite of the danger and intrigue that had brought them together, but because of it. And so they lived, Charlotte and Daniel Thorne, solving mysteries, pursuing justice, and loving each other with a devotion that only grew stronger with each passing year. Proof that the best love stories often begin in the most unexpected ways, with a whisper overheard and a detective stunned by the accuracy with which it was repeated.